Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for this presentation. I feel I want to go back to school, you know, listen to more presentations like this. We are very behind, a little bit, not very, a little bit behind schedule. So I will ask now Mr. Tariq Tawfiq to ask the panel 2 questions, Mr. Islam to ask the panel another 2 questions, and then we open the floor for discussion. We would like to finish by 8. So we thank you. Minister Gada, we thank you very much. If you have to go. Okay.
I will start, by quoting somebody. That obviously we should not follow Europe. And economists cannot agree, so we have to forget about economists until they agree. I mean, this is my modest understanding of what you said. No reforms in bad times, and we have an existential bad time in Egypt here, so we should not have reforms. So I mean, in essence, this is as much as my modest understanding of your very complex presentation. But I would like to throw in a couple of issues, that are pertinent to Egypt from a perspective of an industrialist, not an economist, Your Excellency, you mentioned that growth was not inclusive and it did not create jobs. But in the case of Egypt, we always forget that we have an informal economy that created jobs. So the filter, and when we look at the statistics, and the consumption levels, it shows something is happening. So this is a remark. I'm asking, how true is this? And then we're in a situation right now that we're talking about labor-intensive jobs. The fundamentals right now is that industry is not labor-intensive. Agriculture is not labor-intensive anymore. So where are we? We're constantly forgetting the service sector, and we don't view our policies on a value chain approach. Rather, we still look at it on a sectoral policy approach. So, these are really the questions that are very much pertinent to Egypt, and I'm throwing it to the panel. Who would like to comment?
I think that the quality of the jobs that were created was not the quality of jobs that make people satisfied and happy with their jobs. So they were constantly wanting to get out of these jobs and move to the government, or move to other jobs, or move even out of the country. So it is not that the economy was not creating jobs at all, but that the quality of the jobs and the distribution between sectors and the distribution geographically. So the jobs were not created where the poor live and where families of an average of 7 and 8 kids in Upper Egypt are. So jobs were created, but in some places and not others, in some sectors and not others, and these jobs were not created with the social protection framework. This is what I said, but definitely we have been seeing a huge informal economy, which has continued to create jobs even in the last 3 or 4 years. And this informal economy needs to be, and we're grateful for this, in some sense, this informal economy, because it has helped in some way in providing goods and services that are affordable, but not the quality that you want to see to make you competitive, and not the quality that you want to see to make you part of the larger world economy. So it has its constraints and challenges. So it's not that we did not create jobs.
My second question would be, is that when the definition of reforms, what structural reforms are we advocating and we're talking about? Is it macro reforms, financial reforms, or is basically, reforms that will unlock the economy and unlock the bureaucracy and make us more competitive? In this respect, is it relevant to Egypt that we say that the reforms that we need on the short run is really unlocking the bureaucracy? And then the question, do we have the political will? Because Well, anyway, this is the question. I don't know. Dr. Hussain, maybe you might want to comment on that.
Well, I agree with you that unlocking the bureaucracy is a fundamental issue in the country for any growth. But I will take the human development part as an important issue to all what we're talking about, because if the whole system of education and does not create an output that is fitting for jobs in the economy, then we will have a continuous problem as we go. My issue here, and I would like to share this with you, that employment of tomorrow is not the employment of today. And we will not repeat the employment of the past. The whole issue of development is going like a moving target, and we're shooting into a place. When we reach it, the target has gone somewhere else in the past. And I was talking before we start about the mistakes I've done as a policymaker and legislative in education, for example, because I've looked all the time for a reform, for improving what we have. The box of improvement, whether it is structural or not, it cannot work anymore. I have lost part of the future look, which is the disruptive innovation. Talking about education, I thought of school-based reform, financial reform of the sector, same thing with health. But who is thinking today in our country about re-innovation and transformation? And I think the challenge that we have, if we want to repeat other processes that happened, whether in Europe or in Asia, is not going to working with us. I think we have to stand and look for the future and think of reinvention and transformation rather than the improvement of what we have. Well, that's a good point, because in a gathering like this and other gathering, the whole political system in Egypt and the intellectual system are not coming together for that purpose. If you cannot see what you want, you will not think about it. Imagination is more important than knowledge, because knowledge is limited, but imagination has no limit. And we are all thinking of improvement of a situation that will take very long time with huge resistance to restructure and reform. And I think we are in the same platform as other countries in looking to transformation and reinvention.
We're too old. I think this is what you're saying. We're too old.
If I may, I've been called a co-moderator. Not quite sure what my role should be here, but I will use that particular opportunity to make a few points, perhaps. This will link it to the Honourable Minister's remarks about Egypt and your social policy. First of all, talking about unlocking the potential of the economy. We now know for quite some time that there are surveys of more than 135,000 firms in more than 100 countries. They've been going on for a long time. So the private sector has been asked lots of questions about what constrains them. So the private sector reveals through those 135 surveys in more than 100 countries, what is it that's holding them back? What's holding them back are things like lack of investment in infrastructure, things like lack of access to finance. The transactions cost of doing business never features as the most binding constraints, according to the surveys that have been published for the last 10, 15 years by now. So we do have some evidence about the collective thinking of the private sector and the perceived constraints in more than 100 countries in a sample of more than 135,000 firms, small, medium, and large. So that's my first point. My second point goes back to the Honourable Minister's remarks about social policy. If I may grab the attention of the Minister, your problem is not unique. You mentioned the fact that whenever there is an advertisement that comes out for a lowly position in the public sector, you get lots of applications. You'll be pleased to know that in India, when an advertisement went out for people to serve tea and operate lifts in the public sector and to work in the railways, do you know how many people applied?
5 million?
Close to that. Close to that. It's a large country, much larger than yours. Absolutely. And the verdict from those who were processing those applications said, even if it took 50 years, we'll not be able to complete those processing of applications. It's simply not possible. So the next question to ask, and you've asked it beautifully, Minister, is why is it that the public sector is so coveted by particularly people who are of limited means? There's a lovely survey by two MIT economists, which I strongly recommend that you read, is by Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duffler, both from MIT. They did a survey of the head of households in 10 of the poorest countries of the world for 10 of the poorest families. And they asked a question: what is your career aspiration for your son or your daughter? What did he say?
Government.
Indeed, 75% of those surveyed said, I would like my son to be a post office worker.
Of course.
I would like my daughter to teach in a school. I know the private sector pays a lot. It doesn't provide security. So really, I think you have posed the problem beautifully. You've said, what we need to find out is, why is the private sector not considered attractive enough for people, particularly with limited means? That is very important. Because the yearning for security is a basic and utterly necessary human aspiration. And if that level of security can be provided, it doesn't matter which sector it is, you will find people applying for positions. You will find people applying for positions. So that is, and I just wondered, you would want to comment on it a bit more, Mr. Sheffield.
Or you widen their limitation by a proper education. They wouldn't be limited to be post office or government servants.
I just want to have a quick comment, the private sector still is the governing employer, the biggest employer in Egypt, by far. That's number one. Second thing, we have the lowest discontent when it comes to, and we have here Mr. Abu Bakr Gindi, he can tell you, the last survey that was in the economic census, it shows that the public sector employee is earning 2.5 times as much as the private sector employee, after excluding the management. Yet, the disruption in the workforce is coming entirely from the public sector employees. There is a level of contentment, a very high level of contentment and security in the conformed private sector.
Conformed?
Yes.
Conformed, that's a very important word.
Yes, and this is key, and it's very attractive, and it offers a case. So, this is our experience as private sector. So, but anyway, this is just...
representing the private sector.
Yeah, limited.
I'm not talking about my company. We're talking about the general employment industrial sector.
Formal sector.
Exactly, the formal sector. Formal sector. So there is a success story to build on. It's not either or. But apart from that, the majority of private sector is informal, where there is absolutely no safety, no security, no nothing. And that's another story.
And public sector.
And public sector.
Having 2 jobs, 3.
Exactly. But anyway, would you like to comment?
أنا دي النتائج بتاعت الاقتصاد. In the last economic census, which we published the result in last year, 2014, it shows that about 89% of the employee, the workers in the private sector, only about 11% in the public sector, and the establishments, 99% in the establishment in the private sector, only 0.3 establishment in the public sectors. Also, the wages is even there are only 11% in the public sector, but the wages in 35% in the public sector, 65% in the private sector. The wages in the private sector, the public sector is mostly higher than the private sector. It's a fact. And the whole products, the prices, yes, all the wages. And what we see in all our surveys, which we conduct with many agencies or many international agencies, it shows that all those who are looking for jobs is only they want to work in the government sector, and they look for the warm environment in the private sector. Perhaps there is, but this is the result of what we conduct in last year, and it's very important economic census. We have a lot of one of the most important results also that 75% of the establishments in Alexandria, Cairo, Giza, 75% of the establishments on those only three government, only 30% for the rest. That's why people came from Upper Egypt to work here and create those very lower standard of living around Cairo.
I think that what the survey is telling us confirms what we have discussed at the very beginning, that the story of Egypt is a story of disparity. There is no infrastructure in Upper Egypt. There are no opportunities. There are no investments of private sector. So people have to leave and come and live at the outskirts of Cairo to accept either a lower paying job at the private sector or hope for creating the connections that will lead them into the public sector. Because even when the public sector employs, the largest portion of the public sector is in Cairo and in Giza. And the payment in the public sector, because let me tell you that the story of disparity and lack of justice also exists in government, which is something that I have discovered and that I didn't know about. So in government, not all ministries are alike. So you first want to work, if you are very well connected, in the Ministry of Oil and Gas, or you work in the Ministry of Electricity. And if you know someone and you're a bit connected, you want to work in the Ministry of Finance. And if you're really, really disconnected, you come and work for me. So there is disparity within the public sector. And the reasons why we had the demonstrations and stand-ups between the public sector employees and not among the private sector employees is that those were the disparities within the public sector. So if you work for a Modereya local government, you're getting half the incentives of the guys working centrally with the diwan عامل وزارة. Okay, they all keep 2 or 3 jobs, and they are all not really working enough and not productive enough. But they know that if both of us are not productive and both of us are working limited hours, but still, because you are in Cairo, you are being paid more than me, and I'm still in Cairo, but I am attached to the Modereya or the governorate, the local government. So if you're part of the local government, you're less lucky than in central government. And this is something I didn't know about until I worked in government. So people want, in the same street, in the same building where I work, I have people doing the same job with the same title and getting paid half the ones in the central government. So we are a very centralized country, a very old central government, and there is a prestige with being linked to the central diwan than being working with the Modereya. So people are not stupid. And people are very clever. Sometimes they're even more clever than economists. And the people know what they want to do and how to get to what they want. And that's why people working in the multinationals and the very formal and well-established private sector did not leave and did not complain, because they are protected, because they see a career path, they see a future, they see that the company is stable and they're not at risk of closing down soon, that they make, so there is this idea of human security today and tomorrow is very important. The idea of protection, of opportunity for training, of rights, the whole idea of having rights. So I think people are very clever, and they go where the future is, at least the future they perceive. And then definitely it's an issue of skills and education. You find that the kids who are very well educated keep looking for different jobs and are being headhunted in Egypt, regionally, globally. But people in Upper Egypt and in other places, in rural areas where we haven't invested in skills and education, have very little opportunities, and deep inside, they can't even dream. And we did this in a survey of street children, and the street children said, all what we can do, and I told them they want to be a doctor, an engineer, join us, you will go to a school. They said, all what we can do is become either a football player or a tuk-tuk driver. So don't promise me anything else. Even the street kids are very street smart. So that's
Before leaving just a few remarks. I totally agree with the final remark. Inequality is the key, and this is one of the not so unpleasant consequences of the crisis. For many years, economists, which I agree with you, sometimes are not very smart, believe that the distribution of income had nothing to do with the economic performance of it. How large is the pie has nothing to do with how the pie is sliced. And it's not true at all. It's not true at all. The distribution of income has a huge impact on incentives, and so it's, I totally agree with you. On security, also, I think the problem is not so much that the government sector jobs are too secure. The problem is that maybe the private sector jobs are too unsecure. And so this is also a consequence of the fact that we have been destroying for the past 20 years the welfare state. And the destruction of the welfare state, once again, I was mentioning in the introduction the unintended consequences of economic policies. You do something, and then you find out that you have consequences that are very bad. And destroying the welfare state makes a large chunk of the labor market so unprotected that these people want to leave, and this creates, of course, distortion. And finally, on the moving target, it's also related in some sense. I find what you said very interesting, and once again, I see tendencies, at least in European countries, exactly towards what you were saying shouldn't be done. This huge accent that now is on vocational training, for example. Vocational training is exactly shooting on the past, because you train people for the jobs of today, and then when jobs change, these guys know nothing. And we are abandoning the idea of a general education, of a general knowledge that can then allow you to adapt to different skills, and we move towards, you will learn how to program a computer. Then in 10 years, maybe computers will not have to be programmed because they will program them by themselves, and this guy will have no other skills. So I think that this, what you said is I totally agree, and we are going exactly the opposite direction. We specialize by looking at what exists now, and we are incapable of giving people the education and the flexibility they will need for jobs we don't still know what they will be like.
Maybe we should take some questions from the floor. But Anna, on the education issue, I just have one remark maybe. The other day I was reading an article about Google, and they have a need for some special skills that are in shortage in the market. So they had an arrangement with several Ivy League universities to have nano degrees. They call it nano degrees. So it's a degree that is very specific to one specific skill. So it fills the employment gap on a need basis, and then in Google they recognize this degree as part of the criteria for employment. This idea can solve the social stigma here in Egypt, can put us on a fast track rather than waiting for a full generation. It does not require a university degrees. It can take university dropouts or graduates. These are ideas or tools that we should employ to get on a fast track, and we cannot wait until we reform the whole process. That's just my comment.
Can we start the discussions with the floor, and can we start with a question from Dr. O'Neill?
Dr. O'Neill.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I was just trying to reflect on the Egyptian labor market through the points that you raised. You stressed very much on three main things: that the short term is dangerous, do not reform in bad times, timing and sequencing of reforms are very important, and mainly on the supply side reforms. And so my first question is, well, how long will it take Egypt to converge from the short-run disequilibrium that we are currently facing to the long-term equilibrium? Can we afford to wait? And what are specifically the supply-side reforms that you may suggest? I mean, I need one just message for this, because currently demand management policies do not seem to be working. So can you please elaborate on that? Thank you.
Would you like to answer, or just any more questions? Dr. Sheikh, please.
Thank you. Actually, not a question really, but a few comments. The speech by you, sir, I really enjoyed it. It's very rich. I was just telling my colleague here, full of many ideas. I just want to add to it the following. Number one, it is ala the theme you are talking about. Number one, when people talk about the financial crisis of 2008, the financial crisis of 2008 is not a financial crisis. The financial crisis of 2008 has to do a lot with what you said. It really started a few years earlier in the real sector of the economy. And people who have done research, very intensive research in Imperial College London, have shown that if you looked at small businesses, there was a slowing down, and they developed a super model. I can give you the link, and then it suddenly shows. And then the people in finance, you know, were in America and so on, were really physicists, not economists, top-notch mathematicians who had their models would work as long as you are growing. But if the growth slows, the models wouldn't work. And it is not just, you know, this question of mortgages and so on. So the reason was really in the real side of the economy. Second point is, as Phelps of Columbia University, Columbia, I think, University has shown, a major thing people don't talk about is this. After the Second World War, growth inventions and so on. But since the 70s, if you look at the data in America, since the 70s, services are outweighing by far growth in commodities. And growth rate in services, as it started in the 70s until now and forever, services do not grow as fast as the sort of growth you would have had after Second World War and things like that. This is very important, the distinction between services and all that. Thirdly, people suddenly are worried and talking about China growing at 6.5% and so on, and even China herself is doing funny things, and people forget something very simple. China is a mature economy. She will not grow again at 9%, and it's only natural that she will not grow at 9%. But when China now is growing at 6 and will grow at 5.5 or 6.2% or so, you need to invoke the multiplier accelerator model we used to analyze with the trade cycle, and to show that as the growth slows, investment will slow and income will slow. The multiplier is a double-edged sword, will work for you, against you. And the going down will be multiplied. If investment falls by 10 million, GDP may fall by 30 million generally. Fourth point I just want to make is this. Yes, we sitting here in Egypt have been shocked at the behavior of the European Union. America, when there was the crisis of 2008 and so on, caught it. She was 1 year late, but she was growing at 3%. Isn't it shame that Europe is growing at 0.3% and this financial squeeze and I mean, this is something my students of Economics 201 Introduction to Macro in the American Investing Cairo cannot understand. So this I want to mention. Fifthly, but the minister has left, and this is the point as far as regarding what she said. It is simplistic to say that labor, employment, we need labor intensive and so on. This is simplistic analysis. Anyone who knows rather advanced economists will know that if you look at the Industrial Revolution, you know, the beginning was saying machines were first made by man, then machines were made by machines. But if you look at the history of the Industrial Revolution, 1740 to 1860, machines, machines, machines. But if you plot the wage rate throughout these 120 years, the wage rate was rising. Because machines are like the concept of an old wage fund theory. Machines will also need to have labor working with them. So, and this is an important point. Secondly, another point in Egypt, in the past year when in the UN people are fond of the word inclusive and these funny terms that they use. I mean, if tourism was growing in Egypt at 15 million people were coming every year, tourism has a trickle-down effect, unlike the work of contractors, you know, it has. So people were working. So, I mean, the fact that there are some depressed areas in Upper Egypt, yes, there are depressed areas, as there are in any other economy. One can pay attention to that, but this has, I mean, it is not that simple. It is not that to employ labor, we need labor-intensive techniques, not at all. And finally, what I have been talking about since 1988, the informal sector in Egypt is so huge and so wonderful. Okay, leave aside other things. And without it, we will not be sitting in this room. And in the past 4 or 5 years, after the uprising of the revolution, in the past 4 or 5 years, you find in the Economist magazine, they changed the unemployment rate from 9.6%, which they used to write all the time, and in all the publications of the World Bank and so on, which are not very exact. And now it is 13 point something. Nonsense. The unemployment rate in Egypt in the past 5 years has gone down. Unemployment has risen due to the informal sector, with some costs thereunto appertaining. But it is not as they mention, like for example when they say 40% of the people are below $2 a day. Nonsensical piece of statistics. I'm an econometrician, by the way, so it is not I'm against figures. If I take you to the street in the very poorest part in Cairo, and a man is cleaning the street, you will find him standing like that with a cigarette and a mobile. Anecdotal evidence is as important as my multiple regression in econometrics. These two are more than $2 a day. So I just wanted to mention these rather unusual things. And I admire what you said about people now talking about that old secular stagnation of the 1930s and secular exhilaration. We will not get it, by the way, because they also talked about secular exhilaration and so on. And but these are just a few rather unheard of things that people don't talk about, I mentioned tonight. Thank you.
Well, I thank you, Dr. Yani. Your intervention has been insightful. Seriously. We're talking the same language. From the industrial point of view, not as an
I was
economist.
just telling my friends here when you first talked, I enjoyed every word that you said. Thank
Well,
you.
it's reciprocated. Thank you.
Well, I try to counter comment and so also answer the question what should be done. Can you hear me?
The other question. The other question.
No, I was then another round.
Yeah. Yes.
So just to answer these two questions, I will try to be quick. Well, we will, of course, we agree on Europe. Europe has been criminal in its macroeconomic policies. I also know I'm Italian, so even if it's not as developed as in Egypt, we also have some acquaintance with the concept of the informal economy, and I know how statistics can be misleading, I would say, to say the least. And that also allows me to say something that I think is important. I mean, you have to be careful what indicators you look for. This obsession with the unemployment rate, for example, in a country like Egypt, doesn't mean much. It would be much better to develop indicators of the quality of jobs and the quality of labor, which would be much more imperfect because they would have to compose with the issue of how to measure the informal economy, but as imperfect as they are, they would make more sense than just looking at the unemployment rate when you have an informal economy, which is that important. And that's also something that I totally agree on the fact that the crisis was in the real sector, and to join the minister, and I also believe that the real, and somewhat of what they say on secular stagnation, the real driver of the real crisis, sorry for the double real in my sentence, the real driver of the crisis has been inequality, because the increase of inequality has led to this secular stagnation problem of insufficient demand, and the only solution we could find up to 2008 was this going from bubble to bubble. And so, and this Summer says that. I would like to say I said it before him, but it's not very important. The fact is that these bubbles have been hiding a trend that was underlying, that was real, and nothing to. The financial crisis is just a trigger for a crisis that was bound to happen anyway. And so to link my counter comments to your remarks and to what the minister said, I would say you have a huge problem of inequality. So the first structural reform, even if it's not a structural reform that Mr. Draghi would advise for, the first structural reform is to put your hands on income distribution, which means probably revising and rethinking the tax system, trying to bring some of the informal economy into the formal sector, which also means more security, and realize with what we said before. If you have more security, probably you have a better allocation of jobs. Not everybody will want to go into the public sector. And the second thing, which is not a structural reform, but I think also accompanies a reduction of inequality, is spending more on infrastrucures in some parts of the country. Among the parts of the country where I would spend on infrastructure, I would also put Cairo, because you could use a subway system, I would say. After 24 hours in Cairo, I understood besides jokes, think of the productivity improvement you would have if you could slash by half the commuting time in Cairo. So that is money worth investing.
يعني actually Amina has, she's the lady.
So go ahead.
Dr. Samir, please go ahead. I'm just kidding.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful presentations by Francisco and the minister. I think I would like to just try to situate the discussion a little bit by continuing the focus on policy. Because anecdotes, we can say anecdotes until the end of life, right? I would say two comments. One, the title, that's what the minister has been talking about. That's the link between macroeconomic policies, growth, employment, and poverty. Because we take poverty, we have never taken poverty as a poverty fighting, as a serious policy intervention with recognized means and ways, especially in Asia and Brazil and so on. So I think this time that we have a social policy in Egypt. I think the minister has tried, since she came to this ministry for the first time, to my knowledge, to have elements of a social policy. But it's not a complete social policy. We can talk about this somewhere else, but I think Egypt does not have a proper social policy and social policy instruments and so on, as we know them. My second point is on policy required at this time, at this stage for Egypt. I think the Egyptian economy is in crisis. And the policies that are being used are alien to any crisis confrontation I know of. And we have lived through many crises, as Stiglitz counted 40 crises since the Second World War. I lived through the Asian crisis of 78, 79, and the 2008, and so on. Now, the confrontation of the crisis, if we agree that there is a crisis in Egypt, that we do not have the policy tools that can help the Egyptian economy to get out of the crisis. Examples. We spoke about financial policy, monetary policy, which are two instruments to realign GDP growth as well as creation of employment. There is no coordination of financial and monetary policy in Egypt, and they should be coordinated, because that's number one. Number two, there is an erroneous tendency to think that the objective of monetary policy is targeting inflation. Being a Keynesian, a bit of inflation does not worry me very much. A bit of budget deficit does not worry me very much, providing that you use it to push investment. So I think there is something wrong here, and I cannot see any sign that we are correcting that. Second, yes, Washington consensus has gone. I think I was in a meeting in Washington where Paul Krugman said Washington consensus is WC for short, but it has long been flushed. So I think that sums up your. And I fully agree with you. The alternative is not austerity, but the alternative is investment. And who invests? Now, that's my second point about the present economic policy in Egypt. We are focusing on huge investment in infrastructure. Fine, very good. It is the eternal hobby of Egypt, starting with the pyramids, the dams, the canals, and now the mega projects. That's fine. But then what? You will not get the potential. You will not realize the potential you were talking about in terms of GDP and employment unless you complement these mega projects with other things. And what are these other things? And who's responsible for this? So I think, we really are at a stage where we have to sober up. We have to deal with the situation as a crisis situation and answer the question, what is the objective of development from now to 3 years to 5 years, not 50 years? And where do you finance this? The issue of financing development in this country needs to be confronted head on. And I can see that there is no convincing answer so far. Sorry to be long, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sami. This will require another session.
The Competitiveness Council?
Absolutely. But anyway, Amina, please.
I just wanted to make a comment on fiscal austerity. You mentioned fiscal austerity as something which is not good for growth. I mean, I will not disagree with you, but I think in the literature now it's often referred to as fiscal consolidation more than fiscal austerity. And here by fiscal consolidation I would mean that you look at the ratio between current spending and capital spending, and then by reorganizing your current budget towards more productive spending, this is fiscal consolidation. So you can achieve more growth, more employment with the same spending, but you reorganize your house. And the problem, I think, with Egypt, even with a budget deficit of 13% or 12%, maybe it will be very difficult to lower the budget deficit, but it will be easier to reorganize, spend more on education, spend more on enhancing productivity, spend more on creating equal opportunities. And so it's, yes, fiscal austerity, would you call, I mean, I would not, looking at Greece, okay, I disagree with you about Greece, because Greece had to be punished. Greece, you know, they fudged the data, they lied about many statistics, and so they put themselves in this situation. But I mean, fiscal consolidation is something that is required, because as you said, if our current spending is much, in Egypt, current spending is how much? It's 94% of the budget. Only 6% is left for investment spending on education and health. Thank you. And infrastructure, so 6% on everything else.
Dr. Boucher, you mentioned, I want to comment on what was said about the numbers and the statistics. You mentioned that you think that after the revolution, unemployment gone down. But our numbers, our methodology, it is approved by all the international recommendations and ILO. And when Dr. Samir in his job, I think you remember when you asked us to help the ILO to conduct your study, and they came and they stay 1 week in our offices day and night looking for the data. And you remember what they said to you? They said they wondered that this data was this quality in this agency. And also we asked the year before last year, we asked Eurostat. We asked the Eurostat to come to make a peer review for our labor force survey. And their report is a very positive one, and it's in their website until now. Also, no other body create any labor force survey in Egypt, only ERF. ERF conduct 2 surveys by Dr. Ragi Assad in 06 and 012. And both surveys is the same numbers, or very little slide down from our numbers. In 06, our unemployment is about 9%. Dr. Ragi survey said that it's 8.7. We said that it's 9%. And in 012, also Dr. Ragi Assad and ERF conducted a survey, and we at that time we say it is 12.5, and they said it's 11.9. And by these numbers, and what Dr. Samir see by himself, and I still remember this meeting in your office, and ILO guys came to you and say they wonder, and in the meeting they said that those numbers is or this data, and also you mentioned about the 40% of poverty in Egypt. I think about the $2. We don't rely on $2 or $1. We have our methodology. We don't. Our methodology is when the household, how they pay to get their الخدمات الأساسية. Yes, and also in 09, on 012, we asked the IMF to come and to review our household survey, and also the inflation and CPI survey. And we are very proud about what they put in their website until now about the methodologies. And I can quote what they said, that Egypt CPI is going, it is, I just quote, it is, it has very big changes or big upgrading, and it is follow the international practice and international recommendation and best practice, and it is good until now. And I want you to come to our.
I have no doubt about the format. This I know.
And when we say that this unemployment, it is when we go to the household.
Employment is another thing which I'm talking about.
When we go to the household, we ask them if whatever they work, informal or informal, if they sell handkerchief in the streets, it is employed. But after the revolution, three sectors is badly affected: industry, tourism, التشييد والبناء, construction, badly affected, and those have huge employment in those three sectors, and that's why it is come from 9% until the peak is the first quarter in 2014. It is 13.4, but since then it is decreased until 12.8 until now. This is what I mentioned. Thank you.
My pleasure. بس أنا برضو unemployment informal sector, I have other ideas about it. يعني the man who is driving a bicycle in the street with this thing carrying 1,000 loaves of bread on it, and the bicycle doesn't have brakes, and not a loaf of bread falls on the street, and he moves like that, and lately he holds a mobile also. Who in Egypt, including me, who has been teaching economics for 50 years, who of us has measured his productivity? Who has it?
His mother tell us that he worked.
لا don't believe him. لا يا حبيبي.
His mother told us, or his father, the one who asked it, who fills the questionnaire. He said that this guy doing that or so on. And there's a lot of questions, 14 questions. How can we catch what he said?
I do not underestimate at all the work that you do, the formal and the statistics and the CPI. am aware of it. Fantastic. But generally speaking, given that Egypt has a huge informal sector, like Italy, in Milano, abbiamo big industry, and then 10 kilometers away there is small industry and so on. Italy is our prototype, This informal sector in Egypt needs to be studied in detail, and it is fascinating, but it has not been studied in detail. This is all I'm saying.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I think we're running out of time. You will answer, yes, but I mean, I'm afraid that it all depends, can we afford, time out. Yes, please, and then we wrap up.
So we will discuss head-to-head whether Greece is guilty or not. For a bad loan, you need a bad lender and a bad borrower. You A bad borrower doesn't make a bad loan. You also need a bad lender. On the composition of public expenditure, I totally agree. I totally agree that you can improve the quality of public expenditure. It's of course, don't underestimate the importance of current expenditure in some countries and in some situations. I don't know very well the Egyptian economy, but I suspect the Egyptian economy is one of those cases in which an insufficiently developed welfare state is substituted by the government jobs. So government jobs are an inefficient, I agree, way to provide social security. So if you, and it's what we said before, so if you reduce government jobs without creating a welfare state, what you will do, you will increase the insecurity we were mentioning before, and this is one of the things you don't want to do. So go ahead, shift expenditure, but once again, policy is complex, and if you shift expenditure, you have to think of unintended consequences on other aspects, and most notably poverty and social protection. So you can do that, but at the same time, probably you will have to spend more on automatic stabilizers and things like that, unemployment benefits and things like that. If you don't do that, then this shifting of public expenditure will lead to increased insecurity. It's a bit short, I'm sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to conclude. Dinner is going to be served outside. But before we go out, I want to thank the ILO for bringing Francesco and to listen to what he has said here today. I'm also very proud that the Ministry of Planning is thinking on, because what he's talking about is cutting edge. It's not cutting edge economics. This is something that is being developed and it's coming out. This last slide to me, if our government can think this way and implement our structural reforms this way, and our Minister of Planning can understand and convince the rest of the cabinet that this is the way forward, we will be on the right track. Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending. Thank you.